Hello, world. This is Jamie Kirchick with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and Tablet Magazine, among several other fine publications.
Hi, this is Ali Gharib. I am with Open Zion, the Mideast blog at the Daily Beast, and I am recording from downtown New York.
New York. I'm in Berlin, Germany.
And so today, me and Jamie are going to talk about Chuck Hagel's nomination to be Defense Secretary, some of the politics around it, what it means, and why this is either a good or a bad pick. And I think we fall on different sides of this debate, so hopefully it'll be fun.
We do. I'll just start off by saying I think Chuck Hagel's shown his disqualification by not reserving the domain name chuckhagel.com, which has just been purchased by the Emergency Committee for Israel. So there's 1 point against him.
Chuck Hagel is a bad domain buyer.
Yes, add that to the list.
Yeah.
So why don't you, should I start making the case against Hagel, or do you want to start by making the case for him? Or
well, let's. We're gonna start with why Obama picked him.
Yes. Okay.
And do you want to go first, or should I?
I think you should, since I think you should go first.
Okay, I think Obama picked Hagel because of their personal relationship, and because Obama, much to the dismay of many liberals and progressives, has continued his 4 years of outreach to Republicans, and whether or not Republicans like it, Hagel is a member of their party. I think that Obama probably agrees with me that Hagel is well suited to lead the Defense Department by his experience as an enlisted man and a decorated war veteran of Vietnam. He was a business leader, 2 terms in the Senate. He led the USO, and so he has experience with veterans and so on. And though we've seen that there are some Republicans who don't like him that much, he's nonetheless a bipartisan figure, which is sort of not only in keeping with Obama's modus operandi for security and defense issues, but also with generally sort of Republicans over the past 30 years post-Vietnam, when, in the McGovern, after the McGovern campaign, they were all tarred as pacifists. And so I don't think it's really an unusual step. I think that they do have some subtle differences, but overall, their approaches to some of the big issues line up, and Obama's looking for a Republican political ally.
But don't you think that, you made the point about bipartisanship, but the Republicans are pretty much dead set against him. So I think that's kind of a false point to say that this is he's really a rhino. In terms of the issues that he's going to be in charge of at the Defense Department, he's really not a Republican. He's a Republican, ironically, on everything else. He's actually quite a far-right one, which is why I find some of the progressive or so-called progressive liberal support for him to be so troubling. We'll get into those issues later, but I don't think that that's a very genuine. If the president is seeking to make some kind of bipartisan gesture with this, I find this is probably the worst Republican he could have chose for that point.
Yeah, I don't think. Well, first of all, I don't think that Chuck Hagel is a rhino. I think in many ways that the Republican
on foreign policy issues.
On foreign policy issues. I think in many ways the Republican Party on foreign policy issues has sort of dashed to the right of Hagel, but he, it's not as if, Jamie, there's not a branch of Republican foreign policy that's skeptical of intervention. And, the way in which he might be most a rhino, perhaps, is his steadfast internationalism. And, and he's not quite anti-interventionist to the point of isolationist, and I think that that's reflected in his kind of internationalist ethos. But yeah, I get what you're saying, that there are certainly some Republican hawks in the Congress who disagree firmly with Chuck Hagel. McCain made this comment last week or a couple weeks ago about, I don't know if he's still a member of the Republican Party. Kind of it was like the, cranky _McCain Twitter feed. But I don't think, I don't think that he's necessarily outside the fold. I think we're going to see, actually, throughout the confirmation hearings, and especially on the, if it does come to, I doubt it's going to be a voice vote, but I think we'll see how broad the Republican opposition really is. And my guess is that Hagel will probably be able to peel off a bunch of Republican senators to vote to confirm him, partly because it's that old boys club, and he does come from among their ranks, whether or not there are some of the more hawkish members of the Senate are calling him a rhino or not really a Republican.
Well, here's what I don't understand, and I have yet to hear the vociferous pro-Hagel people really make the case for Hagel. I don't understand why this guy, if you're a Democratic president, you just won re-election, there's a lot of Democrats that you could have chosen for this job. A, why do you choose a Republican? B, why do you choose Chuck Hagel? I don't really see what the case is. It seems to be that most of you guys are just thrilled at pissing off the neocons, and you love seeing, Bill Kristol write all these indignant blog posts. And I have yet to see really the affirmative case for why Chuck Hagel, of all people, would make a great defense secretary, particularly when you do have a host of other smart Democratic, defense policy wonks who would be just as good, if not better, for the job.
Well, I think that's a good point, and certainly it's I as a self-proclaimed so-called liberal progressive, it's an argument that I've dealt with. David Greenberg at the New Republic wrote an essay there, and I responded to it, and he responded back on our side as well, very graciously. And I never got to issue a response just because I was so busy, and then tried to be a real human being this weekend and go to museums and stuff. But yeah, so I didn't really get to fully respond to that. But I think that there is a good liberal and progressive case to be made for Hagel as defense secretary. As you noted before, the guy is a right-wing conservative on domestic issues for the most part. I mean, we'll get to the gay thing later, but for the most part, he is a very right-wing Republican on domestic issues. But I think that on foreign policy, there really is room for a lot of agreement. And frankly, I think that one of the reasons Obama picked him is because he has a bigger public stature than, just frankly, the two other leading candidates for this post, according to all the reports everywhere, were Michelle Flournoy and Ashton Carter. Michelle Flournoy, the former third place at the Defense Department, and Ash Carter, the current second place. And I think that this is how I would look at it, is that, I think that Chuck Hagel is particularly, not uniquely, but particularly well-suited to some of the upcoming sort of progressive liberal challenges over the next 2 years. These are going to be what is bound to be a raised temperature on what to do about Iran, that will include a lot of calls for military intervention there, attacking their nuclear sites. It's going to include paring down the defense budget while at the same time taking care of troops, veterans, and their families. And it's going to include some kind of large-scale, though likely not complete to the very last man, withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I think that, a lot of the Democrats have made this case, or I should say liberals have made this case, said what you said, and that's that there are good qualified candidates. None of them quite have Hegel stature, and I think, frankly, the politics of things like cutting the defense budget and this withdrawal from Afghanistan, I do think that, a lot of these liberals would like to think that there's a new crop of these Democratic people, and they are great. I mean, look, one of the things that David Greenberg kept saying was, you're not making an argument against Michelle Flournoy. And that's because I hope to God that Michelle Flournoy is the next defense secretary. I mean, I think she's great. But I just don't know. I don't know that for these particular challenges, I actually think that it is politically helpful to have.
It sounds like but it sounds like the case that you're making is you agree with him on the political issues, and it has very little to do with his qualifications or ability to manage this vast bureaucracy. It's the fact that he's essentially a pacifist or close to being a pacifist when it comes to Iran, has pretty much ruled out any military option whatsoever, which puts him, in opposition to his own president. And I think, he's going to be, as defense secretary, one would hope that he follows orders of the president. And so his political views really shouldn't matter as much as his qualifications to run this vast bureaucracy. And it seems that the reason why all you guys love Hegel is because of his specific policy views, which I think are going to be less relevant in terms of Iran, because he's going to have to follow the orders of the President of the United States.
Right, but Jimmy, here's where I think the two things that you underestimate about that is that you're right about that in a sense, and really, I'm not an expert in the Pentagon. You may have spent a lot more time there than I have, and as far as like running the bureaucracy, I admit that that's a challenge, and it takes it will take a skilled bureaucratic operator to do that sort of thing. Is Chuck Hagel going to have a perfect tenure at the Pentagon as far as being a manager? I have no idea. Like, I'll be totally honest with you. I just don't know. And people that raise those objections, I've seen some probably the same right-wing stories you have that his staff didn't like working for him. I haven't heard that in the conversations I've had, but sure, I really don't have much to respond to that attack. What I can say is that you're underestimating the role of a cabinet secretary in advising the president, which is where I think that Chuck Hagel's political views, I don't doubt for a moment that he will dutifully carry out the orders given to him by the president, and the president will set policy. But at the same time, we know that this president likes the deliberative process, and so for a liberal or progressive to have Chuck Hagel's, I think, pretty salient views on Iran, which I think you misstated a little bit, but to have those views in the president's ear, I say great.
Okay, well let's go on to those views, because I find those views to be I don't want to use the word extreme, but I think they're pretty out there. I mean, he's essentially opposed every measure meant to punish or isolate the Iranian regime. He's certainly more, I don't know if you want to use the word to the left or to the right. I mean, he's not with where the president is on a lot of these sanctions on Iran. Or on Syria. I mean, you just go back and look at the statements he made. He's not as obsequious as John Kerry when it came to the Assad regime, but he's pretty, he was out there saying that Assad was a man of peace. And this isn't even getting into the Israel stuff, which we'll get to later. But I mean, on these specific policy issues, I find him to be so out there. He's not in the mainstream of Democratic Party thinking. He's not even close to the president on these issues.
Look, I think you're overstating your case about things like the sanctions. Look, there's no doubt that he voted against a set of unilateral sanctions. As I said before, he's got a real internationalist ethos, and he has at times voted for other unilateral sanctions. He voted against one of them that got a prominent feature in the attacks against him, ignoring, of course, that he's voted for other sanctions. And most importantly, he was a co-sponsor of a 2006 resolution that referred Iran to the Security Council for its violations of nuclear non-proliferation rules. And that, of course, led to Security Council sanctions, which the building process of doing that through these international organizations have been the only I'm not saying I'm all for targeted sanctions of Iranian human rights offenders and targeted sanctions of people working on the nuclear program, because their nuclear program is in violation of their obligations. There's no doubt about that. But the only sanctions that have actually been shown to have worked to slow Iran's nuclear progress are the nuclear and weapons sanctions that are imposed by the United Nations, by the Security Council. And Chuck Hagel's bill that he co-sponsored to refer Iran to the Security Council is exactly what builds the momentum and actually builds the legal framework for that kind of thing. And so I think you're overstating your case on sanctions. As for a military strike against Iran, he has said, there's this quote that circulates a lot that was back in 2006 or 2007, where he said it's not a responsible, viable option or something. And I think since then he has repeatedly said that a military option remains on the table. He said it at CSIS. He said it to Josh Rogan last May. He said it in an op-ed last fall with a bunch of other kind of elder statesmen, bipartisan elder statesman group. And I think that you're mistaking his his saying that it's not that he has. It may be just paying lip service to a military option in order to get that kind of negotiating bargaining chip with Iran in order to put pressure on them. And then he signed on to reports that say that an attack on Iran could have disastrous consequences. But that's true. I mean, an attack on Iran could have disastrous consequences.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But I mean, on the Syria, we now know because we've seen what this regime is about, and I think on both Senator Kerry and Hagel, we're just completely and utterly wrong on this in saying that Assad was someone who could be dealt with.
Yeah.
And this has been an ongoing, almost 2-year now, massive slaughter, if not genocide, of the Syrian people.
Brutal.
And if we listened, we are listening. We are listening to what the neo-progressive realists caucus has said, and we're doing nothing. And I think that is equally problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that John Kerry and Chuck Hagel and a lot of other people were wrong about Assad. I can't debate you on that. I mean, I don't know who in their right mind really would. But that said, they're not the only ones who are wrong about it. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu in 2010, which was after Kerry had made his statements, was trying to negotiate through Ron Lauder with the Assad government. I mean, I doubt that Netanyahu would have tried that if he didn't think.
Well, the Israelis have different. I'm the opposite of an Israel firster. The Israelis have different interests in the United States when it comes to Syria, and I don't think that should be held. I don't think Netanyahu's position should be held up as a as a counter to what I have to say. I mean, I disagree with Netanyahu, but he's the Israeli prime minister. I'm talking about the United States.
Yeah, no. I mean, I agree, and I'm definitely not calling you an Israel firster, but I do think that it shows that there are people who are even from the sort of more hawkish end of spectrums, and I do think that they have different interests.
Sure.
But it's just that a lot of people were wrong about Assad. There were a lot of people who thought Assad, through negotiations, could be peeled away from Iran, could be coaxed into Israeli-Syrian peace. I mean, look, they were wrong, but they weren't the only ones that are wrong. And in fact, I think that's another point of view. For all the ripping of Obama as an appeaser, and certainly a lot of his engagement projects have failed, most notably with Iran. They haven't succeeded so far.
Yeah.
There's been others like Burma that have been successful. But as far as those views of John Kerry's and Chuck Hagel's have not they weren't necessarily right, but that doesn't mean that they don't fit with the ethos of the president of actually trying to do something about it, right?
I think Burma is a completely separate issue, and I just don't think that applies to Syria and Iran. But no, I would say that their views have been discredited when it comes to engagement with these regimes, and I think that's quite significant.
Do you think the same thing about Obama, though?
Well, I think Obama's learned a tough lesson over the past 4 years. But yeah, I never, this whole, talking to the Iranians thing that we heard in 2008, that was really a false issue because the United States has talked to the Iranians.
It's true.
Not at this, very high presidential level. But there has been, even during the Bush administration, there was talks with the Iranians.
Right.
So this whole silly debate that we had in 2008 with Hillary and Obama and then with McCain, it's just not, and it's really, this is kind of a false narrative that I think the left was employing, which was that, when Bush came in, we just, cut off all communications, and this is not true.
Well, I mean, I think that there was more of a reluctance in the Bush administration to talk. I think Bush was probably coaxed into it by a lot of his foreign service and foreign policy advisors.
Should we move into the real meat of the controversy here, which is the whole Jewish lobby stuff? And
you want to do a Jewish lobby first or gay lobby first?
Yeah, no, I think the Jewish lobby, because that's really what that's the major controversy.
Let's do it. Jamie Kirchick.
Yeah.
Tell us about Hagel and the Jewish lobby.
Well, I don't, is there a Jewish lobby? Yes, there is. And I don't think referring to it as that, I think it was insensitive. I think it was not really correct because when you're talking about, what he meant was the Israel lobby. And the Israel lobby is not exclusively Jewish.
Right.
In fact, there are a lot of Jews who disagree with what is termed the Israel lobby. If by that you mean, AIPAC, and I guess maybe the ADL and the American Jewish Committee, or it's this sort of, it's this sort of nebulous, I don't want to use the word conspiratorial, but you talk to different people and they put different groups and individuals as part of this Israel lobby. So, the whole Israel lobby thing is sort of problematic. But that said, the problem that I have with the Hagel thing, I don't think he's an anti-Semite, and I don't think throwing out those sorts of accusations are very helpful. It's a sort of false bravado that he has, where he goes around making it sound like he's the only guy in Congress who had the guts to stand up to the Jewish lobby, and that when AIPAC comes around with these stupid letters, I'm not going to sign them. And he never actually says, what about the AIPAC letters are bad? Like, what's wrong with calling on Yasser Arafat to stop terrorism? Like, why is that some horrible, unproductive, neocon, Likudnik thing? He never gets into that. And I just don't really buy into the intimidation factor. I mean, Americans are pro-Israel. Most congressmen come from districts where most of their constituents are pro-Israel. This is just, look at the Pew polls. AIPAC doesn't need to intimidate people. If anything, it's their constituents who would be intimidating them, because most Americans are what would generally be described as pro-Israel. So he feeds into this sort of silly, this sort of silly self-congratulatory victimization narrative that people like your boss, Peter Beinart, and Stephen Wald, love to hype up, which is that you can't talk honestly about Israel in this country without being called or slandered an anti-Semite, or without, someone knocking on your door. It's just ridiculous. It's just not true. So it annoys me. It annoys me more than angers me.
Yeah, I mean, except for the fact, Jamie, how do you contend with the fact that so many people have called Hagel an anti-Semite for this Jewish lobby comment?
Not some people. It was an anonymous Republican staffer who was quoted in a blog post by the Weekly Standard.
And it was by suggestion, by ECI, and it was, this isn't just this one blog post, right? Abe Foxman came out with his statement that it was borderline anti-Semitic. This is not an isolated thing. It's all over the right-wing blogosphere. I mean, Jennifer Rubin, she may not come out and say he's an anti-Semite, but can you deny that she says it in so many words? Like, didn't she write something?
I haven't read her on this, so I can't comment on that.
Oh, well, count your lucky stars. Yeah, I mean, I actually think that he's right, that people do intimidate them, and I think that the campaign against these remarks that he made was very much emblematic of that. The Emergency Committee for Israel does try and intimidate people, and there was a big campaign to intimidate the president.
How? By running advertising? This is free speech, Ali. This is America. Like, you're allowed to make an argument, and it seems to be it's only this issue. It's like, when the anti-gun lobby attacks politicians, when the pro-choice lobby attacks pro-life people, you never hear, intimidation or a conspiracy in the tones, the aroma of the debate. It's not like it is. It's this issue. It's only this issue.
No, I mean,
the Jewish lobby or the Israel lobby where you hear this stuff.
I went to Planned Parenthood in D.C. to get my STD test, and I think definitely people picketing outside of there were trying to intimidate people. I mean, I don't doubt for a second that was the pro-life lobby trying to intimidate people, and I don't doubt that I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but I don't doubt that on your word that there's pro-choice people that try and intimidate pro-lifers as well. I mean, it goes on a lot. It just happens that these are the issues I work on, and Chuck Hagel was a foreign policy guy. When the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was sort of down in the dumps, he asked for that assignment. So this is the issues that he works on, and it just happens that during his tenure in the Senate, the Middle East was and continues to be a really hot region for foreign policy stuff. And it does, and look, I'm not telling ECI not to run their ads. But if they're going to run ads calling people anti-Semites willy-nilly, I mean, frankly, they did it with me too, and so I'm not quoting.
Well, the term, I don't want to get into the Israel first thing.
Yeah, let's not relitigate that. But I'm sorry I brought it up. But yeah, I mean, I think that there is some truth to that, to his statement, and I agree with you that Jewish lobby. I mean, is it insensitive? I guess I could accept that. Other words I might use to describe the term Jewish lobby are impolitic, inartful. But as you noted, there are lots of Christian Zionists, which is what makes it imprecise. but I'm not sure that it's necessarily, and not only Christian Zionists, but broad.
But as to the nature of it, it's more than that. It's the intimidation. It's that word I have a problem with, because that's called lobbying. That's called free speech. That's called having a voice in this country. And it seems only to be certain Jews who are slandered with the term Israel Firster, or they're called, dual agents, and it's their loyalty is questioned. It's only this group of people.
Well, listen,
who are exercising and participating in the democratic process. And so, intimidate. He's a congressman. He should expect nasty letters from constituents and lobby groups if he takes a position on an issue that they disagree with. That's the price to be paid of being a legislator, or being a commentator, or being a journalist.
So what you're saying is that intimidation is part of lobbying and part of politics, and then Chuck Hagel.
It's not intimidation. It's not intimidation. AIPAC coming to you and asking you to sign a letter. It's not intimidation.
What about?
It's called lobbying. It's called call it pressuring. A pressure group is what they call it in England. It's using the word intimidate. It just has this odor of dark forces and sort of illicit activity, and I just think it's false. And I think his using that language, I think that's what angered people.
Yeah, I mean that's entirely possible, but I think you're reading way too much into the word intimidation here. And frankly, I think that some of these there have been. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that there's going to be pressure to do these letters and that sort of thing. But there definitely have been also what I would call pretty straight-up smear campaigns against people on these issues, especially with the anti-Semitism charge. I mean, I know you're not making that charge, so I'm not saying this to you at all. But that charge is just getting way out of hand in the D.C. discourse. The way people, Jen Rubin throws it around willy-nilly. The Emergency Committee throws it around all the time. Like,
who are they accused of? Who have they? Who has been accused? Who's been smeared as being an anti-Semite?
Well, me, for example, I never used the word Israel Firster, but when Josh Block sent a smear email to a listserv and then said later on Twitter that he sent it on background to 400 reporters, he included me on his list of anti-Semites. I've never used Israel Firster. I've never accused anybody of dual loyalty.
Okay. Well, I'm not.
And he called for me to be fired, man. I think that's an intimidation campaign, hands down.
Okay. Well, all right. I just think, I think the victimization here is just a little much. I don't see. You can put your own personal case. I don't see a whole list of people who've been inappropriately accused of this term. I don't.
Okay. I think that you can say to some extent that the same thing about the sort of the anti-Israel label, though I'll readily admit that that's nowhere near as severe.
No, it's not.
But throwing that label gets thrown around an awful lot too, and once again, it's the same characters. It's the Jen Rubins of the world that label anybody willy-nilly, like my friend Daniel Levy, who I'm sure you probably don't agree with on many points. She calls this guy an anti-Israel all-star or something. Look, Daniel Levy's a liberal Israeli. He served in the IDF. The guy, I don't know how you call the guy anti-Israel. He's doing what he thinks is right.
It doesn't preclude someone from being. Well,
you're right.
The term anti-Israel.
That's not in and of itself.
Yeah,
he's trying
that's true.
This is not a guy who's trying to destroy Israel, right? Jen Rubin might think he has the wrong idea of how he's trying to help Israel, but that doesn't necessarily, it seems a bit far afield to call someone like that anti-Israel. Anyway. I think, unless you have a final thought, I think we're probably going to have to agree to disagree and move on this one.
Yeah. Yeah. So should we move on to the gay lobby?
Why don't you introduce that one?
Well, this is actually, I think, more substantive because this is a real issue that the Secretary of Defense is going to have to deal with. And I think what's getting lost in this debate, Israel is one country out of 200 in the world.
Yep.
So I think, I don't think the Secretary of Defense is going to have, he shouldn't be waking up every night and every day solely concerned about Israel. I think both sides of this Israel thing need to realize that there's lots of other countries and challenges in the world. But when it comes to the gay issue, we have a massive bureaucracy, which only 2 years ago, under this president's leadership, which is noteworthy, is in the process of undoing a decades-long discriminatory policy. And the military is a very conservative culture. I might even go so far as to say there's an anti-gay culture within the military.
I mean, I think there certainly has been in the past. There's no doubt about that.
Well, yeah, but I think you talk to a lot of soldiers, and they come from backgrounds. I'm not categorizing the entire military this way, but there's obviously a strong, Southern representation where the gay thing is just not cool with a lot of people, okay? And whatever their private views are, which they're allowed to have, you now have a policy, which is a non-discriminatory policy. And you need someone at the top of this hierarchy who is sensitive to this issue. And I don't think anyone questions whether or not Leanne Panetta is. Chuck Hagel, there are serious questions about this guy's attitudes on this issue. He has a virtual 0% rating over a 12-year career from the Human Rights Campaign. He made these disgusting comments about Jim Hormel, the first openly gay ambassador, where he said that being gay was an inhibiting factor. For government service.
Abroad,
Hey,
right.
that we have he was openly aggressively gay, which is what Hegel. That's the kind of term that's gotten all this notoriety. But he also.
I think you're right that the inhibiting comment and the openly aggressively, I think, is rightly probably the most offensive part of his remarks.
It is, and He didn't apologize for these comments until 3 weeks ago, when his name was being shortlisted for defense secretary. He didn't even apologize to Hormel. Hormel did not initially accept the apology because Hagel just issued a 3-sentence, apology, quote unquote, a public statement to the Washington Post, I believe. Right. He never bothered to call Jim Hormel. Now, Chuck Hagel had 14 years. One would think that if you publicly drag some guy's reputation through the mud, like Chuck Hagel did with Jim Hormel. And then if you really went through a change of heart, like all these Chuck Hagel defenders are saying that he has, you'd think that you might pause and say, you know what, I'm going to make a phone call to this guy whose reputation I slandered and who I dragged through the mud. I'm not going to make a big deal of it. I'm not going to publicize it. Maybe I probably should publicize it because what I said about him was public. But I'm just going to call him up because I've changed my mind about the whole gay thing. And I'm going to apologize. He never did that. So I just don't buy this apology. And I think there's a lot of doubts to be had about where Chuck Hagel thinks about these issues. I'm not saying he has to go out, in a feather boa and march in a gay pride parade. But I'm just saying you need someone who has a sensitivity about these issues, and I don't see any evidence that Chuck Hagel does.
Well, I agree with you on some things. I agree that this actually is one of the most important liberal priorities that he should really be grilled on in Senate confirmation, because this, as you said, this does have a particular bearing on running the bureaucracy and personnel matters at the Pentagon.
Right.
And I do think that. So I'm not going to argue with your incredulity at his apology. Because look, I mean, it's if you want to not believe him, you can not believe him. I hear what you're saying about the fact that he didn't reach out personally, and frankly, I would say that is something that he should have done as well. But the fact of the matter is that he did come out, and like I said, this is a conservative Republican who had a bad rating from the Human Rights Campaign, which you might not like as a group. But I didn't say I didn't like them. I didn't say you didn't. I mean, this is just because of our exchange on Twitter the other day. But he had. Oh,
I'm just saying. No, I'm saying I thought that their acceptance of his apology, I think, was
buying into
problematic. I didn't. Yes, I think. Look, the Human Rights Campaign, this is a whole other debate, but they're, essentially an arm of the Democratic Party.
Okay.
So they're going to fall into line with the president.
I'm ill-suited to have this debate just because, this. I love, my former colleague at Think Progress, Zach Ford, that runs the LGBT blog there. He's a great blogger, and he's a real man of conscience. And so he's basically, when I literally, it happens that I have questions and I email him about them, and he's like my go-to guy on these things. It's just not something I'm that immersed in. So I'll take your word for it that they're not with the Democrats.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that doesn't mean, I think that I feel like there might be a sort of appropriateness to that because of the fact that, let's be honest. I think that, like I said in my piece, about the gay equality lobby. Human rights campaign has kind of seen as an arm of the Democrats. I think probably the reason for that, and one of the reasons that they've done that and become recognized as one of the more influential gay rights lobbies, is because the Democrats have been a much more friendly party to gay values, and like you might say that they're an arm of the Democratic Party, but nonetheless they are a big group, and they accepted Chuck Hagel's apology and said that they view him as an ally, which I don't think is totally unfounded. I mean, if you want to be a skeptic about it, if you want to not believe it, that's fine. But I think that, like, in a lot of these movements, when you're trying to bring people over, there has to be some room for redemption there, and you have to kind of welcome the converts.
Yeah, I understand. I just
even if it's under political pressure, and that's me conceding that. I mean, look at Obama's evolution into the gay marriage thing. Like, that was under political pressure too, and I think that it's great.
But there's a difference. Yeah, there is. I know, but there's a difference, and this is this whole kind of Glenn Greenwald. Like all these guys who are going around saying, like, well, who really paid for the log cabin ad, and the Jews are manipulating the gays. I mean, I think that's really absurd. And the notion that gay Republicans might have an issue with Chuck Hagel, and God forbid, might not like Chuck Hagel on the Israel issue. Because you know what? They're Republicans at the end of the day. And most Republicans don't agree with Chuck Hagel on Israel. And particularly the gay ones, who probably are more pro-Israel, because Israel's the only country in the Middle East that doesn't kill gay people. So this kind of conspiracy theorizing about the motives of the log cabin Republicans and who was really behind the advertisement, I find just to be ridiculous and offensive to members of log cabin and to gay conservatives.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're not the only ones, though. Did you see on Twitter that this guy, Chris Barron, who's a former national director of Log Cabin Republican, he came out and said, the quote is fact, Hagel has a better record on gay rights than Mitt Romney. And, like...
Is that true? How is it? I mean, I don't know how he says that. Because maybe he didn't vote, or he abstained from the federal marriage amendment. I don't know where he comes up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know either, but the point is that there are at least some even people who have former affiliations with Log Cabin.
Well, there's a whole personal, I don't want to get into it, there's a whole personal reason why Chris Barron would say that, because Chris Barron used to work for Log Cabin Republicans, and one of the reasons why they started Go Proud was because of a personnel dispute. I mean, there's a lot of personal things going on in that world that would lead Chris Barron to take an easy pot shot at Log Cabin, so I don't... I'm not...
Fair enough. And you know those issues better than I do.
Yeah.
So I'll defer to you on that.
Yeah, I thought David Frum had a very good point where he was responding to Andrew Sullivan, who was also engaging in this sort of conspiracy theorizing. I mean, look at Barney Frank, by the way. Okay, Barney Frank, who I think is, not a neocon Likudnik. He came out last week and said if any other minority group in this country had been attacked in the way that Chuck Hagel attacked gay people, it would be a huge issue for a presidential nomination. So is Barney Frank, are his bona fides now going to be questioned by Glenn Greenwald? I mean, they are being questioned by Andrew Sullivan. And I thought David Frum had a very good response where he said, the whole point of gay equality is so that gay people can be Republicans just like gay people can be Democrats. And if they're Republicans, they're going to have Republican views on things, and they're going to probably oppose Chuck Hagel. There's no need for this, neocon Likudnik conspiracy theory nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time? I mean, I agree that I don't really care.
And look, Log Cabin at the end of Log Cabin is a Republican group. They're a partisan Republican group, and part of being a partisan Republican group is causing trouble for the other party, and going out and purchasing full-page ads, attacking the president's nominee. It causes him trouble. It's partisan politics. I mean, no one has to be. I mean, when else has any partisan politician or organization been accused of being inconsistent? I mean, that's kind of the when you're a partisan group, you're supposed to attack the other side. That's just like the name of the game. We might not like it, but that's how it's played.
Right, but now we're getting back into this debate about whether Chuck Hagel is fairly considered a Republican or not. To some extent, right? He's being chosen
by a Democratic president.
That's true.
That makes him part of the other team. So.
Okay, yeah, that may well be true. But yeah, I mean, I think it's like taking out. I do think it's You know, how many full-page newspaper ads, like, I'll defer to your expertise again, how many full-page newspaper ads has the Log Cabin Republicans taken up?
I don't know.
Okay. I mean, you know, I just think, you know, I've never seen, I read the Times, I used to subscribe 7 days a week, but I've never seen a full-page ad from them before.
So what are you suggesting?
Like,
I mean, what are you what are you suggesting? Like, what's wrong about them? What's, like, fishy about them doing this?
No, I don't think there's anything fishy about them doing it.
I
just disagree with them and don't think the president should care.
Okay, fine.
I mean, I don't think the president should care what the Log Cabin Republicans say.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I see that there is some. I understand. Look, what Chuck Hagel said was offensive. I frankly believe his apology. I know, I know, like, Steve Clemons has written pretty eloquently about his.
Well, he did hug Steve at a party, so that kind of disqualifies, his guy's entire record.
No, I mean, I don't think it disqualifies his entire record, but it's an indication of the fact that his views had changed before 3 weeks ago. Right? How many hardcore homophobes do you know that are, like, good friends with openly gay men and give them big hugs at parties? I've met a few homophobes in my life, and I don't think they do that.
It's more common than you think. In Washington, It's more common than you think.
Yeah, that may well be true. But yeah, I mean, anyway.
And Steve Clements is obviously also inclined to support Hagel anyway, and to find reasons to support him. So, I mean,
he's an avowed. Clements is an avowed supporter of Hagel and also an avowed personal friend. So there's no surprise there. But yeah, I mean, this is Washington. Everybody has a dog in every fight, right?
Right.
So that's. I think we're going to have to again, surprisingly, agree to disagree about that one.
Yeah, but the gay thing isn't the only. I don't consider myself a progressive, but there's lots of other issues on which progressives, should and I think do have serious concerns with Chuck Hagel. I mean,
can we do a quick sidebar here, Jamie?
Yeah.
Do you consider? I've seen you write before columns about liberal values and so on. Do you consider yourself like a classical liberal kind
yes.
of?
Yes, a European. Well, I live in Europe now, and I would align myself with the European liberals.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that because I've seen it.
No.
So I do think that some of these other issues, you're right, are progressive liberal issues on which there are legitimate concerns about Hegel. I don't think any of it rises to the point of nearly the vociferous attacks against him that we've seen. But I do think that these are totally 100% legitimate questions for senators to raise publicly, and especially, I think it's a job requirement that senators would ask Hegel about these during confirmation.
Right.
My two big, other than the gay issue, which, like I said, a personnel issue should definitely be grilled on it vigorously.
Yeah.
We've got the fact that Chuck Hagel has been an anti-abortion record of voting in the Senate.
He's a global warming denier, is he not?
He's actually gone back and forth about. He's flirted with climate change skepticism, but the bulk of his record is accepting of climate change, just not necessarily that inclined to do things like impose regulations and so on about it. And that is the other.
Well, because the Department of Defense is one of the biggest consumers of producers of greenhouse gas, isn't it?
Yeah, biggest consumers of fossil fuels. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, Bob Gates did a lot of good work implementing some green programs. I don't think nearly enough. Yeah. But he did good work towards that way, so you want to make sure that those programs are both continued and bolstered throughout every subsequent Secretary of Defense's tenure, so that, we don't all die when the sun's rays tear through the ozone layer and stuff.
Absolutely.
Because what's the point of all this if we don't get to stay alive?
Right.
And so I do think that those are concerns and that he should be asked about them. The abortion one is particularly interesting because he actually voted on a military issue about abortion, which was this bill several years back that was to allow military service women abortion access on basis, even with them paying for it out of their own pocket. And Chuck Hagel voted against that. So I think that he should just be grilled on that. And, frankly, that's something that I would say that if he hasn't changed his position on it and wouldn't pledge to fully carry, because the law was eventually passed despite Chuck Hagel's no vote.
I see.
And if he hasn't pushed that position on it, I think that would be legitimate grounds for a no vote, because we're talking about all the women service members of the U.S. military. And
but he's not going to. He'll say he supports it. I don't doubt that he would. In the same way that he says he'll support, open service.
Right.
It may not be sincere, but so basically, what I want to get from the folks like yourself, Ali, is that you love the prospect of Hagel being defense secretary so much because of the Iran thing, the Iran file, that you're really just willing to overlook all these other progressive concerns. Is that not accurate?
No, I don't think that's... again, Jamie, I think you're overstating your case there. I'm not willing to overlook them, but I'm not willing to call him I'm not willing to say that Chuck Hagel is unfit for the job because of these things. I think that these are things that have a rightful place to be raised as, civilly raised as concerns, and then addressed throughout confirmation hearings.
Right, but Hagel. Like I said, there's so many other people that you could have chosen for this job. There's something about Chuck, right? He's really like the thrill of kind of sticking it to the Israel lobby, combined with his sort of realist views, make him such an appealing candidate that you're willing to endure all these slings and arrows from the women, from the gays, from the environmentalists, from so many other people in the liberal coalition. You're willing to endure all this stuff because of Chuck. There's something about him that just makes him better than Ashton Carter or Michelle Flournoy or Ray Mabus or any of these other potential people.
Yeah, I think we kind of went through that before. I once, like I said, you're totally overstating this. You say you're willing to take all these slings and arrows from women and gays, and as I'm saying, he's not necessarily taking all these slings and arrows from women. Half of the population of America is not shouting down. All the women of America are not shouting down Chuck Hagel for having voted against abortion rights on military bases. As I just said, the most influential gay rights group in D.C. has come out supporting Hagel and calling him an ally. And these are much less clear-cut than you say. It's the difference between progressive. What you're talking about is some imagined widespread progressive opposition, whereas there are individual progressives, but the entire progressive and liberal movements in America are not opposed to Chuck Hagel and are willing to, at the very least, hear him out on these issues. I think that he should be heard out on these issues, and I hope that his views on them have evolved, so to speak, and that he gets confirmed, because I think not only on the Iran issue, but on, as I said before, cutting the defense budget and on withdrawing from Afghanistan, I think he's a guy who's well positioned to really lead on those things.
What about his... sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's all right. I'm done. Go ahead.
Well, what about these comments that just surfaced where he says that Iraq was a war for oil? That seems like a pretty outrageous comment to be making, particularly considering the fact that he voted for the war. There are lots of arguments to be made against the Iraq war. I'm not one of these people. I supported the war, and I'm not one of these people who thinks that if you didn't support it, you're a traitor by any means. There are plenty of legitimate reasons to oppose the Iraq war. But the notion that it was a war for oil, I think, is pretty absurd and without any proof.
To tell you the truth, Jamie, I haven't really read the whole backstory of those comments, so I'm not that comfortable talking about them. I think that, if that really is the tone and tenor of his comments, I think it's probably not great. And as you well know, it's not an uncommon belief on the left side of the political spectrum. So, while you say it's outrageous, there are certainly a lot of people who would actually probably strongly agree with that, and it's not surprising that you would find it outrageous because they're on the opposite side of the political spectrum as you. But I don't think everybody finds that outrageous.
Okay, so we had a second technical difficulty, but we're back on track. So we were talking about the war for oil thing. Yeah, that's going to be a problem in the hearings. I really do. I think he's going to have to explain that. Because I think of all the opposition to Iraq arguments that one could make, the war for oil one is really the most noxious, false, and silly. But we'll see what happens.
Okay.
As you want to make predictions now.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about the potential significance of a Hagel pick.
Okay. Right, the significance, right. That's right. I do think it's significant. I actually agree with what your boss, Peter Beinart, said, that this would represent a significant sort of shift in sort of foreign policy thinking, and that Hegel's views are really not in the mainstream of America. And I can understand why the people who are supporting him most loudly are kind of wetting their lips at the prospect of having this guy as SecDef. Now, whether or not he's going to be able to implement all the sort of fantasies, the dream policies that the sort of progressive movement, wants is another question. Because this president, as much as he's been criticized by, national security hawks, I'm not one of these people who thinks that Obama is some like crazy radical Marxist. I mean, he's taken the war to the enemy in a far more aggressive way in some aspects. I mean, he's been very aggressive in fighting the war on terror, and he's been a real disappointment, if I'm correct in categorizing a lot of progressives. He's been a real disappointment to them on a lot of issues. No?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right, and I agree with you that this could be a big change, but it most likely... I mean, I think what you're saying is that this could be a big change, but most likely it will not be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of agree with that, and I agree with my boss's Peter Beinart's column at OpenZion.com about this. I hope that it's a big change, because I frankly think that Hegel has some pretty sound and sober views on U.S. foreign policy, and I think that a lot of times there's been David Greenberg in his response to my criticisms of him called him an isolationist. This is an attack that Michael Rubin launched in commentary as well, and there's just no basis for that. And I as someone who is an internationalist myself, I think it would be great to have a guy who is focused on working through multilateral organizations and with our allies throughout the world on moving some of these issues forward. And so I guess I kind of agree with you that I think that it has potential, but in all likelihood, these things are very, very difficult to move around, and it might not quite work out that way. And as you noted before, Obama's still going to be making the calls. I do think Chuck Hagel will be a valuable voice of advising the president in those cabinet meetings, but ultimately it's going to be Obama's call. And you're right that I think he disappoints a lot of progressives, and if he keeps making the same calls the way he does, I think it's just going to be more further disappointment for them, whether or not they rooted for Hagel.
Right.
Okay.
Now,
so
in terms of...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Predictions. I'm not following being overseas and whatnot. I'm not following the internal dynamics of the Senate. If I had to make a guess, I would say he would. Just, I know, yeah. I follow the Bundestag instead. I would say he probably will get passed, but I think it'll be close. Just because if the president is going to come out and make an appointment, I think most Democrats will fall into line. But it'll be interesting to see where someone like Chuck Schumer, who's already voiced some mild skepticism of this appointment, will fall. That'll be telling. But he only needs 51 votes. Is that correct?
Well, if the Republicans decide to go nuclear and filibuster, they'll need
6. Right. Do you think they'll do that?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't think that they'll have the. Because I think a filibuster would be beaten. They know it.
You think they would beat a filibuster? You think they can get 60 votes on this?
Yep.
Okay.
My guess, my optimistic guess, is there will be less than 10 nays, which is saying something because only 2 secretaries of defense in the past 30 years have gotten more than 2 nay votes. But my guess is less than 10 nays. I mean, look at this. This battle has been going on for a freaking month already, and you've only got 4 senators that have come out and pledged to oppose Chuck Hagel's nomination as defense secretary.
It hasn't been announced until as we speak. It's being announced, so we'll see what happens. I think you'll see several more people come out.
Yeah, that's right. I'm accounting for those several more with my grand total of 10 nay votes. That's my prediction.
10 nay votes, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong. Like I said, I think that's an optimistic take. But I could be wrong. But here's how I think it's going to shake out. I think that there are going to be some Republicans who do not share your view of Chuck Hagel being excommunicated from the party. And I think that might be a few Democrats. Chuck Schumer is certainly a candidate who could potentially vote against. Though I do think that the Obama administration, if they have any idea, they've proven themselves inept managers before, so maybe they haven't. But if they have any sensibility whatsoever, they've already gone to their members in the Senate and said, and seen where they stand, and seen that they can turn around enough of the Chuck Schumers and Bob Menendez's and so on. So they've probably already done that, and then, I think that they can probably peel off a lot of Republicans. Not every senator is going to be closer to, the Lindsey Grahams of the world. I mean, John Cornyn is just like, the guy just doesn't, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz don't really know what they're talking about in foreign policy. John Cornyn was in the paper yesterday saying that, he thinks that Chuck Hagel's views are unconscionable because Iran is gaining influence in the region. And it's like, have you not read the news in 2 years, man?
Because what?
Iran is gaining influence in the region. It's just
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Say that last point again.
I said that John Cornyn said that it's unconscionable to vote for Hagel because of his views on Iran, while Iran is gaining influence in the region. Which, of course, if you've read a newspaper in the last 2 years, you know that Iran is actually rapidly losing influence in the region. So,
that's something we'll have to have another Blogging Heads about.
Okay, I mean, but just like
I don't think that's an
Syria,
open and shut
Hamas,
case on that.
And so on. I think they've pretty much
Hamas is becoming more powerful in Palestinian politics. I mean,
right, and lining itself up with the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah,
it's another debate. You're right. I'll stop. So you think he'll pass, but narrowly, and I think he'll pass with a lot of votes.
I say narrowly again. Maybe I'm reading too much into all this sort of debate about him. Maybe it's not going to have that much effect on the votes, but I mean, wasn't John Tower very closely? Wasn't he rejected by the Senate, or was it a close vote?
I don't know. I'd have to look that up. I don't recall.
I don't know. I mean, we could see. I think the hearings are going to be very interesting, and there's a lot of potential that the hearings could change the dynamic totally. He could say something stupid. He could be very eloquent and allay a lot of the fears that a lot of his current skeptics or opponents have about him. So I think the hearings will be very interesting.
I agree. They're going to be the most fun confirmation hearings in a while.
Yeah.
And I think that and you made your point before that you think that his apology to the gay community and to Harmel was politically expedient. Chuck Hagel's not a guy known for sugarcoating what he thinks and just saying things for political expediency. So it could be fun, bless you. I expect him to probably give a little bit of way, but also really adhere to his first principles because that's just kind of been his record.
Yeah, we'll see.
It'll be fun. And speaking of fun, Jamie, it's been a pleasure.
It was a pleasure
talking to you here, and so we'll get a chance to see. I'm sure we'll have a couple words on Twitter once the actual confirmation hearings and come down, and we'll see if he. I mean, we're both predicting he passes, so if he gets voted down, we both lose. But we'll see.
Well, this is good. If there's one thing I agree with on Chuck Hagel, it's dialogue with your enemies.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
We've done that today.
Except for Assad. Let's not get into it. I'm sorry. Okay.
All right. Signing off in Berlin. Thank you, Ollie.
Yeah, likewise. Downtown New York. Talk to you soon, Jamie. Take it easy.
Ciao.
Bye.